Okay, good afternoon. Good afternoon. It's great to see all of you here. Thank you. I am Feng Shenghu, the Richard G. Engelsman Dean of Arts and Sciences, and it is my honor to welcome you to the installation of Erin McGlothlin as the Gloria M. Goldstein Professor of Holocaust Studies. It is wonderful to see so many of you here today from our WashU community. I would also like to welcome everyone joining us via our live stream. I cannot see you. Thank you for helping to mark this very special occasion. We are especially delighted to have several of Erin's family members in the room. They include Mark Trottenberg, husband, Ben Trottenberg, stepson, Samantha Trottenberg, daughter-in-law, Ellen Trottenberg, stepson, Carly Trottenberg, daughter-in-law, Kara Covington, sister, John Covington, brother-in-law, Abigail Covington, niece, and last but not least, Drew McGlothlin, brother. You can tell that not only is Erin very popular among the colleagues, she is very popular among the extended family. As you all know, higher education, including WashU, is currently facing numerous unprecedented challenges. So a ceremony like this might at first glance seem out of step with the times. However, I would argue that in times of turbulence like this, we must seize every opportunity to reaffirm our core values. And one of those values is faculty excellence, which we honor today. For that reason, today's ceremony is especially significant, not only for our wonderful colleague, Erin McGlothlin, but also for our resilient and extraordinary community of arts and sciences in WashU. There's nothing quite like an installation ceremony to bring together all of us to recognize the generosity of our donors and to celebrate the achievements of our faculty. This afternoon is a great time to pause and appreciate the exciting progress we're making toward our ambitious vision of establishing arts and sciences as a global model of research, scholarship, and education. Which brings me to our honoree, Professor Erin McGlothlin. As Vice Dean of Undergraduate Affairs in Arts and Sciences, it's fair to say few people on campus are more visible and integral than Erin to the success of our undergraduate students. As a scholar and a leader, Erin's work exemplifies the impact of a transdisciplinary, world-class liberal arts education on our understanding of complex historical and societal issues. In just a few minutes, Professor Matt Erland here will share more about Erin's impressive career, which includes groundbreaking work in the areas of Holocaust literature and film, as well as post-war and contemporary German and Jewish studies. It is also important to note that Erin has been at the forefront of our signature initiative, Literacies for Life and Career, which showcases the comprehensive value of a liberal arts education and prepares students to take their arts and sciences skills out of the classroom and into their lives as leaders, innovators, and problem solvers. I am incredibly proud to have Erin as a member of our faculty and as a member of the Arts and Sciences leadership team. I appreciate her truly unwavering commitment to and passion for our undergraduate students here at WashU. And now I would like to turn our attention to the namesake of this professorship and the gift that made it possible. The professorship is a gift from Samuel R. Goldstein in honor of his wife, Gloria M. Goldstein. It was established in 1980 to strengthen WashU's Jewish Studies program and Olin Library's collection of Jewish literature and artifacts. After graduating from Brooklyn College, Samuel served in the Army Air Corps at Scott Air Force Base, where he met his future wife on a blind date. The couple married in 1945, and Samuel joined his father-in-law's company, later known as Apex Oil Corporation. Through Samuel's leadership, Apex grew from a small oil company into a multi-billion dollar international oil trading, refining, and marketing company. Samuel was truly an unpretentious person who cherished his privacy, and he often carried out his philanthropy through gifts in his wife's name. The Goldsteins had strong ties to WashU. Gloria studied occupational therapy, and Samuel was awarded the university's Second Century Award in year 2000. In addition to the professorship we celebrate this afternoon, Samuel established the David Rabinoff Scholarship in the Brown School, supported scholarships, made substantial gifts to the School of Medicine, and provided leadership support to the campaign for Washington University. We are truly grateful to the generosity of donors and friends such as the Goldsteins, whose contributions continue to help us recruit and retain the world's best scholars such as Erin McGlothlin. With that, I would like to invite Matt Earlham up to the podium to tell us more about Erin's distinguished career.
Thanks. Can everyone hear me? Thanks, Feng Sheng. It's great to see so many people here. As Feng Sheng indicated, I think the size of this audience really speaks to the exceptionally high regard in which Erin is held by her colleagues at WashU and around the world, as well as by her students and staff, really anyone who has had the pleasure of working with her. And I assume this holds for her family as well, but you can tell us what you think at dinner tonight. It also testifies to the multifaceted quality of Erin's contributions. Since arriving at WashU over 20 years ago, she's taken on a remarkably wide range of leadership roles related to scholarship and research, to graduate and undergraduate teaching, and to A&S and university-wide administration. As a colleague and a friend who arrived at the university just 1 year before she did, and who has worked closely with her for over 2 decades, I think I am as familiar with these contributions as just about anyone. We've collaborated closely in departmental and extra-departmental contexts. I've served as her chair. She served as my chair. We have traded teaching strategies and materials and watched each other teach. And we have shared many of the highs and lows of academic life, from celebrating book publications and tenure to commiserating over unfair peer reviews and the tribulations of life as a junior faculty member. When Erin arrived at the Department of Germanic Languages and Literature in 2001, there was a strong ethos that defined the department, one that is carried over into the new Department of Comparative Literature and Thought, into which it has been absorbed. The idea was that as a small unit trying to maintain a high profile, both on campus and in the profession, we needed to do it all. Every faculty member was expected to be an outstanding scholar, an exceptional teacher, and a highly visible member of the university community. I think Erin embodies this ideal like no one else. This means that there are many Erins that deserve to be celebrated, and I know most of them. But today our focus is on one in particular, Erin the scholar, and I'd like to say a few words about her contributions in this arena. And I'm not going to list off all of her amazing accomplishments. I'm going to try to speak more generally about what I see as her significant contributions. As many of you know, Erin has established herself as a leading voice in the interdisciplinary field of Holocaust studies. Erin is also a scholar of literature and film, and those of you who aren't familiar with her work may be wondering how the study of literature and film interfaces with research into the horrific events of the Nazi genocide. Holocaust studies as practiced by Erin emerged in the United States several decades ago across a range of disciplines and departments, as scholars began to engage with the rapidly expanding corpus of biographical, fictional, and documentary representations of the Holocaust in literature, cinema, and the visual arts. Their interest was driven in part by the recognition that fictionalized or at least stylized depictions in works ranging from the novels of Primo Levi to the TV miniseries Holocaust, to films like Spielberg's Schindler's List and Art Spiegelman's comic book Mouse were shaping the perceptions of the public in far more powerful ways than traditional historical research could ever do. At stake in scholarly investigations of these works are questions about how the arts can contribute to our understanding of and coming to terms with this civilizational catastrophe and its multi-generational legacy. On the one hand, it's hard to imagine a topic more important and deserving of our attention as teachers and scholars. On the other hand, this is also a highly contested area of research. After all, literature and the arts are typically associated with pleasure and entertainment. And isn't there something blasphemous in turning the Holocaust into a source of entertainment, however sophisticated? And don't popular fictional treatments in particular run the risk of reducing an event of unspeakable horror to a set of predictable literary tropes or Hollywood cliches? Some commentators, especially early on, wondered whether an adequate fictional representation of the Holocaust is even possible. Elie Wiesel, for example, once said that, quote, Auschwitz negates all literature as it negates all theories and doctrines. Others have debated the legitimacy of certain kinds of representations. Some of you may remember the controversy that surrounded the publication of Art Spiegelman's Mouse, which recounts the events of the Holocaust and its aftermath in the medium of a comic book. These are the debates into which Erin has intervened directly and impactfully in her scholarship that has not shied away from tackling difficult questions. She has, for example, published a pioneering and now canonical essay on Spiegelman's Mouse. She's also published 2 major book-length studies, which can be seen as focal points in a larger research landscape that engages with fundamental topics in nuanced and innovative ways. I just want to say a few words about her books. In second-generation Holocaust literature, Legacies of Survival and Perpetration, Erin helped shape the discussion of the so-called second-generation authors writing about the Holocaust. Second generation in this context refers to writers who have no personal experience of the event, but who nonetheless feel compelled to engage imaginatively with its impact on their lives and on society more generally. With her signature focus on narrative structures and strategies, this study examines how literary texts written by the children of victims, bystanders, and perpetrators work through the trauma, guilt, and stigmatization inherited from the parent generation. The book has become a touchstone in the field, widely cited by scholars and frequently assigned in the classroom. This first book also provided the basic intellectual framework from which her second prize-winning monograph emerged. In 2021, she published Constructing the Mind of the Holocaust Perpetrator in Fiction and Nonfiction, a milestone publication in a broader research program on the complex narrative strategies employed by authors to represent the mind of the perpetrator in literature and cinema. Even though perpetrators have often figured prominently in literature and film that deal with the Holocaust and its aftermath, scholars long avoided any discussion of how these works address the problem of representing perpetrator subjectivity. Erin's study tackles this question head-on, using her expertise in narratology to produce an analysis that is unparalleled, both in terms of its sophistication and its terminological precision. The book is also path-breaking in its historical scope and treatment of multiple genres, ranging from Hannah Arendt's 1963 Eichmann in Jerusalem to Martin Amis's 2014 novel Zone of Interest. So that gives you a taste of the area in which Erin is working and how significant it is. I don't really have time to comment on Erin's exceptional teaching and mentoring, unfortunately. And it might not seem central to the achievements for which she is receiving recognition today, except that it is, to the extent that Erin's activities in this area testify to her unwavering commitment to bringing her research into the classroom and making it relevant for students at all levels. She is just as highly regarded by the graduate students who have enrolled in her seminars on narratology and representation of the Holocaust as by the first-year students enrolled in her Ampersand program. This was only supposed to be 3 to 5 minutes, and it's a little bit longer than that, but I'd like to conclude. I've known her for a long time. I'd like to conclude by saying something about Erin's current role. As everybody knows, she now serves as the Vice Dean of Undergraduate Affairs in the College of Arts and Sciences. I think it was clear from the beginning that Erin had an interest in and an aptitude for administration. Certainly in 2013, when she served as interim director for the Center of the Humanities, we began to worry a bit that her time with us might be limited. We managed to hold on to her for almost 10 more years. But in 2021, our fears were realized and she took the plunge. I thought about the appropriate metaphor for that. This story has a happy ending, however, because it has become clear that Erin continues to make invaluable contributions to the department and the discipline, despite the workload associated with trying to keep 7,000 undergraduates happy, healthy, and engaged. She has multiple articles in the pipeline, and in 2023, she was the co-recipient of a major $1.3 million grant from the United Kingdom Arts and Humanities Research Council. Together with her principal investigator, she serves as co-investigator for the project Rethinking the Holocaust: Literature, Context, Canons, and Circulations. Part of this project involves serving as co-editor of the Cambridge History of Holocaust Literature, which will include contributions by over 40 international experts in Holocaust representation, and which, quote, aims to set the path of the scholarly discourse on the literature of the Holocaust for the next 25 years. So it would be tempting to see this as a kind of culmination of a distinguished career, except that it's much too early for that kind of talk. In addition to setting the path I just described, I have no doubt that Erin will also be responsible for many of the signposts that mark the way forward. At the moment, it looks like she will be logging these accomplishments in addition to serving the university in an administrative capacity. But I will say, Erin, if you ever do find yourself missing the department, I can tell you that we also miss you, and we're happy to welcome you back into the fold at any time. I even promise that we won't ask you to be chair. That's it.
Privilege and honor to present you with this medallion to signify your holding this professorship. On the front, it reads Gloria M. Goldstein, Professor of Holocaust Studies, Arts and Sciences. And on the back, it reads Erin McGlothlin, March 20th, 2025. Thank you. I don't usually tear up, but it's starting to happen. So let's keep those tears at bay as long as I can to give my talk here. First of all, I'd like to start my presentation by expressing my deep gratitude, both for this honor and for the many opportunities I've had that have made my success as a scholar possible. To begin with, I'd like to thank everybody here, university leaders, colleagues, undergraduate and graduate students, friends, and family for coming out, either in person or virtually, to celebrate this deeply meaningful moment with me. I particularly appreciate the family members who were able to take time out of their work week so that they could be here today. My husband, Mark, my brother, Drew, my sister, Kara, my niece, Abby, and my stepson, Ben. And I'd like to give an affectionate shout out to family who are joining online, my brother-in-law, John, my stepson, Dylan, my daughters-in-law, Carly and Samantha, and my grandkids, Delilah and Blake. I doubt they're watching, but just in case they are, they're 4 and 1. It's very unlikely, but they needed to be called out. I'm reminded by their loving support that although our family is quite small, We are very close, and I'm so grateful that we show up for each other. I especially want to acknowledge the steadfast backing of my husband, who came into my life well after my career had solidified, but who immediately embraced what my work means to me. He has become my #1 champion, and he makes every day better with his love and his boundless, wacky humor. Further, I'd like to thank the members of my home department, formerly the Department of Germanic Languages and Literatures, and now the Department of Comparative Literature and Thought, for their support and encouragement over the years. And I think Matt showed exactly what makes our department special and strong, is that we do support each other. I'd also like to recognize my colleagues in the college office for their collaborative work environment, which I've been privileged to be a part of these last 3.5 years. In addition, I'd like to express my gratitude to Dean Hu for the attentive mentorship he's given me since I became Vice Dean of Undergraduate Affairs. Finally, I'd like to recognize the hard work of Beth Ackerman, Ana Diaz, and other staff in advancement and in the Office of the Dean of Arts and Sciences to make this event happen. As my list of people to thank demonstrates, I have been so fortunate over the course of my career to have been surrounded by a great many people who are inspiring, encouraging, resourceful, dedicated to deep scholarly inquiry and the careful education of students, ethically minded, and wicked smart. My flourishing as a scholar, a teacher, a leader, and as a person is a testament to the mutually supportive community I found at WashU over the last 23.5 years. Finally, I'd like to express appreciation to the Goldstein family who made this opportunity possible. I will bear the name of the Gloria M. Goldstein Professor of Holocaust Studies with gratitude and pride. As evident from my biography and the program, my home discipline is German studies. However, it is profoundly meaningful to me that this professorship recognizes my work on the Holocaust, the systematic state-sponsored persecution and genocide of European Jews and others by Nazi Germany and its allies from 1933 to 1945. Holocaust studies is the scholarly field with which I have come to identify most. In fact, in the epilogue to my 2021 book, The Mind of the Holocaust Perpetrator in Fiction and Nonfiction, I wrote, quote, "I consider myself a scholar of the Holocaust and its representation. This is not only my field of expertise, which I have spent decades developing, but also an area of academic inquiry that continues to fascinate and trouble me. The canon of Holocaust representation thus constitutes the abiding question of my scholarly life," end quote. This last phrase, which I have borrowed for the title of my presentation today, represents the gradually increasing significance that the history, memory, and depiction of the Holocaust have come to assume in my research and teaching. When I first came to WashU as an assistant professor in 2001, I was a Germanist who was trained in the full German literary canon and in German Jewish studies, but whose work focused mostly on Holocaust literature, particularly in the German language. Since that time, however, I have come slowly to define myself primarily as a Holocaust studies scholar who works not only on German language texts, but also on the transnational canon of Holocaust literature and film more broadly. And I have also come to realize with clarity and a sense of purpose that the complex, immense, and at times confounding history, legacy, and representation of the Nazi genocide of the European Jews is a subject that will continue to engross me, to challenge me, and to provoke far more questions than I will be able to answer. I feel a profound conviction that this is not only the area of my strongest contribution as a researcher and a teacher, but also a matter of exceptional personal importance. In fact, the subject of the Holocaust has become the enduring preoccupation of my professional life. At the same time, however, as much as I have come to feel that my purpose as a scholar of Holocaust studies has been abiding and unmistakable, it was not predestined, nor was my career in academia in general inevitable or even likely. When I first entered the interconnected fields of German Jewish studies and Holocaust studies, most scholars engaging in them identified as Jewish. As might be inferred by my name, I am in fact not Jewish. In the early years of my career, that aspect of my identity often provoked puzzlement in people. I distinctly remember once when I was introduced as a guest speaker at the St. Louis Holocaust Museum and Learning Center, seeing the heads of the audience collectively tilt in mild confusion and skepticism that I was the announced expert. At that time, early in my career, it was assumed that only Jews would care enough about Jewish history and culture to dedicate their working lives to studying the catastrophic destruction of Jewish individuals and communities in the Holocaust, an assumption I found to be troubling because it implied that one can be engaged intellectually and committed ethically to a topic only if it pertains to one's identity. At any rate, while my entry into the field was not met with hostility, it was greeted with curiosity. And I gradually learned that the most important thing was whether I, from my position of personal remove from this history, had something to add to the scholarship on it. I'm actually doubly distanced from the legacy of the Nazi genocide of the Jews, because not only am I not Jewish, I'm also not German. And in fact, I did not begin to learn the German language until I was 21, the year I entered college. And even that, a pathway in higher education, wasn't a given in my family. My parents, who were much older than average when they had me and my siblings, had a mixed educational background. My mother, who grew up on a farm in rural Texas, received a bachelor's degree from a religious women's college in the early 1950s, while my father, the son of tenant farmers who had been reduced to poverty by the Dust Bowl and the Great Depression, had to leave school in the 10th grade to support his family. When it came to the education of their children, my parents were a bit at a loss for how to guide us, especially because they simply didn't have the money to send us to college and didn't know how to help us navigate the system without it. My sister and brother entered the Army right after high school, while I, convinced in any case that college wouldn't be any different from the narrow parochialism of my suburban Dallas high school, took on a series of jobs in a restaurant, a health club, and the local chamber of commerce. After experiencing firsthand the disdain and assumption of stupidity that many people have for those without a college degree, a class bias that still provokes anger in me today, I decided to attend the University of Texas at Arlington, and then later to transfer and graduate from the University of Texas at Austin. Although I was a Pell student and tuition at the University of Texas was, by today's standards, absurdly low, I won't mention how much I paid per semester because I fear the students among you might pass out from shock. I worked full-time or nearly full-time to support myself when I was in college. What my parents lacked in terms of familiarity with higher education and the financial means to help their children get to college, however, they more than made up for with the greatest gift they could have given to my siblings and me, a true love and appreciation for reading, a proclivity that we each began to acquire well before kindergarten and that we all three continue to indulge in avidly. And I just want to point out that's me on the right there. As a little girl, I got a certificate in a reading program, and that's my brother behind me. My father spent his free time reading history, biography, and other nonfiction, while my mother took us every week to the local library, where we were encouraged to follow our interests and to load our little arms with as many books as we could carry. I developed a passion for literature, and by the time I was 11, I was borrowing and reading several novels a week. My parents also filled our house with as many box sets of abridged classic novels and series on history and culture as they could afford. I became intrigued by one particular series, the Time Life World War II Library, especially the volumes relating to National Socialism and the Holocaust, which inspired me to write my first research paper, a 10-page thesis during my junior year of high school on National Socialist anti-Semitic propaganda. My interest in the Nazi period, the Holocaust, and the war was one that I shared with my father, or as we called him, Pop. And Pop and I had many animated discussions about the topic, especially after I went to college and began to gain more knowledge. In fact, when I would come home from visits from UT, my family would always joke, "There goes Pop and Erin again, arguing about World War II." I can only imagine how insufferable I must have been with my know-it-all attitude, and I really wish my father were here to argue with, still today. I mention all this because people often make the assumption that in families where higher education isn't necessarily a given, family members don't contribute much to the students' preparedness for university study or their academic interests. In fact, in my family, intellectual engagement and critical thinking were highly valued and nurtured, even if they weren't connected to a university classroom. I perceive a direct line, not a broken one, between my upbringing in my family and my current life as a scholar, and I couldn't be prouder or more appreciative of the gifts of reading, learning, and thinking that my parents gave me. I took my first course in Holocaust literature in the spring semester of my senior year in college, and it introduced me to the idea that one could approach the Holocaust not just through its history, but also through its narrative representation. However, it wasn't until I was a graduate student in German at the University of Virginia that I began in earnest to combine my two longstanding intellectual and personal interests, literature and the Holocaust, in unified inquiry. In the 1990s, when I was a graduate student, the study of the Holocaust as a distinct disciplinary enterprise was just beginning to emerge in a significant way, spurred by a surge in public fascination with the Holocaust, both in the United States, which saw the opening of the US Holocaust Memorial Museum and the release of Schindler's List in the same year, the year that I started graduate school, and in Germany, where I studied and taught for 2 years during that time, and where the Holocaust was a major topic in media, public discourse, and literature. About a decade before that, researchers had begun exploring the massive long-term psychological, societal, and cultural impact of the Holocaust. Within this scholarly focus, literary critics had begun to perceive a distinct international and multilingual canon of literature that traced back to the earliest days of National Socialism, and that was being added to each year with a profusion of contemporary texts. By the time that I began to write my dissertation, there was a lot of energy and innovative thinking in the scholarship on Holocaust literature, although it would still take some time before the larger field of Holocaust studies, which had long been dominated by historians, would embrace Holocaust literary studies. I've been fortunate to both contribute to the formation and acceptance of Holocaust literary studies as a dynamic and generative field, and to benefit from its sophisticated methodologies. In the time I have remaining, I'd like to give you a quick overview of my contributions as a scholar and as a teacher in this area. And actually, Matt did a better job of this, so you'll forgive me if it's my own assessment is not quite as clear. My research and teaching are located at the convergence of the fields of German studies, Jewish studies, Holocaust studies, and narrative theory. And the overarching questions they pursue center on the ways in which the Holocaust, a cluster of historical events that concluded almost 80 years ago this year, continues to resound in powerful and sometimes uncanny or contradictory ways in the cultural landscape, in particular in literature, but also to a certain extent in film. I employ a comparative approach that considers the broader transnational phenomenon of Holocaust representation, since a notable feature of this canon is its transgression of national, cultural, and linguistic borders. Moreover, I approach this corpus of texts from the methodological standpoint of narrative theory, an umbrella concept encompassing a diverse set of theoretical and analytical tools for exploring the principles and practices of narrative representation. By employing the frameworks of narratology in my analysis of depictions of the Holocaust, I am able not only to attend to their thematic and discursive elements, but also to elucidate how their formal structure and narrative organization contribute to the ways in which they register the experience of the Holocaust and convey this memory to their audience. Literary and cultural study of the Holocaust, including my own work, grapples with a fundamental paradox. On the one hand, the Holocaust, Nazi Germany's programmatic genocide of Europe's Jewish populations and of other marginalized groups, has historically been deemed, on account of its almost inconceivable scope and reach and its staggering brutality, beyond imagination, comprehension, and description, and thus resistant to representation. On the other hand, since the first moments of historical violence that would come to be known as the Holocaust, and in particular in the last several decades, there has been a barrage of artistic responses to the event in a variety of media that seek to probe it for what it can reveal about the extremity of human behavior, the failure of conventional political, social, and ethical paradigms, and the capacity of culture to both accommodate and resist humanity's darkest impulses. The incongruity between the force and persistence of cultural taboos on artistic representation of the Holocaust and the widespread and systematic transgression of these taboos in the cultural sphere compels scholarly investigation, as does the veritable profusion of literary, cinematic, and artistic works associated with it. My research proceeds from this intellectually and ethically challenging demand. Focusing on a variety of discursive orientations and media, including not only fiction, memoir, literary and journalistic nonfiction, and graphic narrative, but also documentary and feature film, my research surveys the cultural memory and artistic legacy of the Holocaust from a diversity of perspectives, including both the experience of persons directly involved in the event, meaning the mostly Jewish victims and survivors on the one hand, and the non-Jewish perpetrators and collaborators on the other hand, and the viewpoints of post-Holocaust generations. My multi-perspectival, comparative, and narratologically informed approach to the literature of the Holocaust is exemplified in my first monograph, Second-Generation Holocaust Literature, Legacies of Survival and Perpetration, which analyzes the literary responses of a generation of writers who feel powerfully shaped by the Holocaust, despite the fact that they did not personally experience it. In this book, I expand the term second-generation Holocaust literature, which was coined to describe literary texts written from the perspective of the children of survivors, to include written texts from the point of view of the children of Nazi perpetrators. The first study to critically juxtapose these two literatures, the book analyzes the ways in which second-generation writers from opposite sides of a massive historical and experiential divide explore their devastating family legacies. Attending closely to the significant difference between the two groups and the challenge of bringing them together without relativizing either the suffering of the victims or the guilt of the perpetrators, I demonstrate how the second generation's common attempt to imagine and depict an event they can barely fathom results in a narrative crisis in which narrative voice fractures, temporality is suspended, and generic conventions are transgressed or radically reshaped. Alongside my work on the transmission and representation of the Holocaust by second-generation writers, my early scholarship also explored the depiction of the events of 1933 to 1945 in fiction and nonfiction by writers who had survived the Holocaust, such as Aaron Appelfeld and Fred Wander. This work aligned with the mainstream orientation of Holocaust literary studies at the time, which approached the literary portrayal of the event almost exclusively from the perspective of its victims and survivors. At about the time that I published my first monograph, however, I began to perceive a major gap in the existing scholarship, which devoted the greater part of its attention to literary representations that framed the subjective experience of the Holocaust on the part of those who survived it, but was reluctant to bring its nuanced approach to bear on representations of the experience of Holocaust perpetrators, particularly recent novels that feature the perpetrator's perspective. While I understood the ethical reasons for this critical tendency to overlook or avoid humanizing depictions of perpetrators, I believed it left unanswered important questions about the cultural construction of the mind of historical actors who played a fundamental role in perpetrating genocide. My initial work in this area sought to stimulate a greater scholarly conversation about narrative depictions of Holocaust perpetrators and to propose initial methods for analyzing how the consciousness of perpetrator protagonists is narrated in Holocaust fiction. It also constituted a turning point in my research, which led to my second monograph, The Mind of the Holocaust Perpetrator in Fiction and Nonfiction. Focusing on depictions of Holocaust perpetrators in journalistic and imaginative discourse from the early 1960s to the present, it analyzes the narrative strategies developed by writers to render the subjective perspective of the Nazi perpetrator and thereby to transform a figure conventionally considered an archetype of evil into an ambivalent psychological and moral subject. I trace in the book a longer historical trajectory that connects recent fictional representations of invented perpetrators to the wave of journalistic and non-fictional engagements with real-life perpetrators in the 1960s and 1970s. Fiction and nonfiction are often regarded as diametrically opposed to each other. My book, however, reframes the relationship between fictional and nonfictional discourse as a dynamic continuum rather than a fixed binary. And in fact, with regard to representations of the subjectivity of perpetrators, fiction and nonfiction share a number of narrative properties and are, in fact, are mutually informative. In particular, the fictional and nonfictional portrayals I investigate in the book utilize an array of filtering mechanisms to alternately compel and thwart reader identification by drawing the reader into the perpetrator's perspective and at the same time generating a measure of critical distance from the perpetrator's mindset. In so doing, these texts demonstrate both the hazards and the benefits of representational practice. My more recent and current work, which has come to encompass film and other media in addition to written narrative, has taken two directions, both of which allow me to increasingly connect my research to our current political and cultural moment. In the first direction, I examine the ways in which master narratives of the Holocaust are deployed to disparate ends in contemporary cultural texts, which are capable of both disseminating and critically interrogating reductive, trite, or totalizing interpretations of an event that has become overdetermined in current political and cultural discourse, which frequently distorts the history and memory of the Holocaust for its own ends. In particular, my work explores both texts that employ cliched or deceptive practices of representing the Holocaust and those that challenge popular myths and the redemptive reading and viewing practices they activate, particularly depictions that capitalize on readers' desire for narrative closure and emotional catharsis. My goal with this work is to apply a critical lens to well-established narratives of the Holocaust in order to assess both their troubling and their salutary aspects, and to illuminate the reductive propensity and even at times distorted character of our contemporary understanding of the Holocaust. In the second direction of my recent and current research, which relates to my longstanding interest in non-fictional depictions of the Holocaust and the ways in which they employ narrative strategies that we typically associate with fiction, I analyzed documents authored by real-life perpetrators, such as bureaucratic reports, speeches, and memos. Such documents implicitly or explicitly seek to tell a story about the brutal events they represent. And at the same time, they work to efface their narrative positioning by producing a stance of objectivity and self-evident truth. My research shows how perpetrator-authored documents function as rhetorical and ideological instruments to influence and incite events, as well as how they tell the story of the unfolding genocide in real time as the perpetrators are authorizing, planning, and implementing it. Further, my work in this area demonstrates how documentary narratives, and in particular, the routine, apparently neutral genres of administrative governance that are ubiquitous in institutions that regulate public life, can be mobilized to engender and justify persecution and violence as necessary and natural. While my research is limited to Nazi-authorized bureaucratic texts, my conclusions can apply more generally, alerting us to the ways in which bureaucratic discourse in our own cultural and political moment can be exploited to naturalize and sustain political persecution and the deployment of violence. Indeed, we have seen with shock and horror over the last 2 months how the commonplace administrative and legal processes that have been constituent of our democratic bureaucratic norms have been cynically manipulated to systematically dismantle those norms. I have focused thus far exclusively on my scholarship and have concluded with a sober reminder of how my research, which I long thought was largely unconnected to contemporary political conditions, resonates in alarming ways with what we're experiencing in our country right now. But I would like to end my presentation on an unalloyed, positive note by talking briefly about the most rewarding part of my work on the Holocaust, my teaching. I have been teaching the literature of the Holocaust now for over 25 years, and with each passing year, I have become increasingly convinced that the study of the Holocaust can form an important part of the critical and ethical development of college students. To be sure, I do not think that education, even education about the Holocaust, inherently makes one a better or more ethically minded person. In fact, the history of National Socialism belies such an assumption, given the large proportion of men with advanced degrees amongst the perpetrators of the Holocaust. But I do believe that the study of the Holocaust, and the study of Holocaust literature in particular, can help students sharpen their critical and analytical skills, prompt them to identify the ways in which narratives can be utilized both to express the traumatic after effects of violence and to create and sustain dangerous ideological positions, and encourage them to reflect on myriad ethical dilemmas endemic to the Holocaust and to its post-war representation and its status in contemporary discourse. I'm seeing students' development in these areas in the class that I'm currently teaching, which is part of the year-long Ampersand program on the history, memory, and representation of the Holocaust that, since 2015, I've been co-directing, first with Professor Annika Walke and now with Dr. Megan Pitka. Designed to enable first-year students to develop a deep and sophisticated understanding of the causes, dynamics, implications, representation, and memory of the Nazi genocide, the program includes 2 linked courses and culminates in a study trip to Holocaust-related sites in Germany and Poland. I am continually astonished and gratified by the dedication and energy that the students in this program bring to their analysis of narratives of the genocide. And I am always impressed and inspired by their astute insights and their earnest desire to think carefully through the many issues involved in depicting and understanding an event as vast and complex as the Holocaust. It is meaningful for me to guide them through that journey of discovery, and it is a true privilege to learn alongside them and from them. This program represents the high point of my experience as a teacher, and I've lost my last page. Oh yes, you'll recognize this. And it reminds me daily of why the Holocaust remains the abiding question of my scholarly life. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Erin, for that fascinating presentation and those insightful comments. I've heard about Erin's ampersand program many, many times, and I just love those pictures. I think we all should take the class, right? And thank you for sharing the personal story as well. That was also fascinating. Never saw all pictures. I don't know how it could just show up in a newspaper as a 5-year-old. And thank you all for joining us today. This concludes the formal portion of today's ceremony. We have a reception somewhere out there, so please join us for the reception and offer your own congratulations to Erin and her family.